Hey everybody, this is the fourth here. And in this video, I wanted to look at cleaning and enhancing your sounds using EQ. One of the greatest uses of EQ, in my opinion, is to clean up and enhance your sounds. And here is an example of a sound from one of my mixes that I have done just that using an EQ. So here is the EQ'd sound. It sounds pretty good. And here is the original sound. That EQ'd sound just sounds a ton better in my opinion. It's a lot cleaner, it's a little bit lighter, but it doesn't lose the body, and it just sounds really good to me. And I'll take a better look at how I've done that as I go through this video. And I also will be doing it live using this snare sample here. So when I am cleaning up and enhancing my sounds, I usually like to start just by making cuts at different frequency ranges that aren't particularly important to or even distract from the desired character of a sound. So, I use cuts and maybe a high pass to just reduce or remove any frequencies that are making the sound less than ideal. And, there's no shortcut to this, there's no right way to do it, there's no secret tips about it, it's just playing around, cutting different frequencies with different bandwidths, and really paying attention to and listening really closely to how the sound is affected by these cuts, and deciding what sounds good to you. And once you do that, you can fine-tune things to get exactly the sound you want. So practice is going to be a huge part in learning to do this efficiently. Let's take a look at this snare. And this whole process is pretty subjective, so what sounds right to me may not sound right to you, but I'm going to kind of walk you through the process, and while I do it, I'll just explain things so that you can understand, even if it doesn't quite sound right to you. Because your taste for this snare might be a little bit different. So here is the original snare sound. And I want to start by cleaning it up using some cuts to do that. So the first thing I'll usually do is just kind of grab one of the bands and make a cut. And I will sweep that cut around while playing the sound to see, where I can make this cut to help the sound better. So to me, I feel like this frequency range here should have a little bit of a cut to it. And in some cases, you might find that you don't really need to make a cut on the sound anywhere, and that's perfectly fine. But I do find in a lot of cases, I do need to reduce certain frequency ranges. So now I'm going to play around with another cut and see if there's anything else. So I didn't really hear anything that I wanted to cut out using just a cut like this. So I'm going to play the sound some more and really listen closely. And I can hear a bit of a resonant tone that I don't want. I don't know if you can quite hear it, but I can hear it. And, when I say resonant tone, I just mean kind of a ringing tone or a certain tone that is too present in the sound. And you'll have a better idea of what I'm talking about when I remove it. So to find out which frequency exactly is causing that resonance tone, I will make a very narrow boost. And I'll sweep that around the frequencies that I think it is occurring in. So right now I hear it in the low frequencies. And you can hear when I use this boost, you can now hear different frequencies are resonating. They're really present now. And what I do is I'll sweep that frequency until I hear the original frequency that I heard boosted. And so this is the frequency that I'm hearing. If you listen to it boosted, and then if you listen to the original sound, you might be able to tell that it stands out a little bit. And personally, I don't want that. I want it to be a little bit cleaner. So I'm going to cut. And how much I cut just depends on, my preference. Basically, I'm just going to cut until I feel like that isn't causing a problem anymore, until it's kind of not really noticed. And now I'm actually, after cutting that, I do hear a second tone that I want to cut. It's a little bit higher pitched. Maybe you can hear that as well. So I'm going to, find that as well. And that is the tone that I was hearing right here. And I've just cut that, and it sounds pretty good to me. If I wanted to filter out some of the low frequencies as well, I could kind of high pass that. I'd probably want to use somewhat of a steep high pass because it is a snare sound. And so that sounds pretty good to me. Let's see how it sounds without that EQ on. And it's kind of a subtle difference, but to me it does sound better. It just sounds cleaner, maybe a bit tighter. I don't know if that's the right word or anything, but maybe you can kind of know what I'm talking about. It sounds a decent bit better to me. So that's pretty much the idea behind cleaning the sound up, just making those cuts and removing anything that's kind of distracting or muddying up or affecting the sound in a negative way. And so if you look at the ride cymbal example, you'll see that I high passed all of the lower frequencies, but I didn't high pass it so much that it cut out the body, because I think that would have sounded weird. If I increase that high pass, it starts to sound really, really thin, and that's just not a good sound. In some mixes, that might work if you have a ton of stuff going on, in this range. But for this particular sound, I did want that body of the ride to be present. So, I high passed it, and then pretty much I just cut out some ringing tones. And if I turn that EQ off, you should be able to hear the ringing tones some. I'm particularly hearing this one down here. But if I kind of turn these up as well, you can hear that there's just a bit of ringing up there. And, I heard that and I didn't want it to be in the sound, so I cut it out. It's kind of shrill up in this frequency range, if you can hear that, when I have the EQ off. And that just helps to remove that. So, that's pretty much the process of cleaning up your sounds. And you do want to be careful not to overdo it. You can see I'm not making huge cuts or anything. Sometimes I do make larger cuts. But, really it's going to take careful listening, practice, and all that stuff to really get, some decent skill at this process. So sometimes, all I need to do is make those cuts. And you can see in the right example, that's almost all I've done. I have made 2 very slight boosts, but there definitely have been cases where all I've done to a certain sound is use EQ to make cuts. So sometimes all you need is cuts, but other times you may need to boost certain frequency ranges as well. And this is kind of more enhancing the sound. Now really it's all tied together, because by cleaning the sound you are enhancing it, but cleaning it you're kind of removing, enhancing it you're kind of adding to it. So I think it's fair to describe the cutting process as cleaning and the boosting process as enhancing. So if you do have to boost, that's fine, there's nothing wrong with making boosts. But you probably shouldn't have to make very large boosts. You shouldn't have to be boosting way too much in your sounds. If you find that you do have to make very large boosts, you might consider either changing that sound for a different one that is closer to the sound you want, or you might layer it with another sound that adds that desired character to your sound. And the reason I say this is just because if you do really huge boosts, it can kind of sound a little bit weird. It doesn't sound all that great in some cases. In other cases it sounds fine. So if you do end up using a huge boost and it sounds good to you, really paying attention objectively, it sounds good to you, then that's fine. There's no reason why you shouldn't do it, as long as it really does sound good to you. But in many cases it might sound kind of weird, and in those cases you might try swapping the sound or layering it with a different sound that adds that presence to the frequency range that you were wanting to boost. So let's listen to the snare again. And maybe I want to boost the body of that snare to make it hit a little bit harder. I can go down to the frequency where the body of that snare is, and I can boost it. And right now I'm boosting it way too much, but I could boost it by just a little bit to have it hit a little bit harder. And whether you do that or not is completely up to you. For me, I think it could go either way. It really would depend on the song that I'm mixing it into. And then alternatively, maybe I want a bit more high end in that snare. And that does sound a bit better. It sounds brighter, which is pretty nice. You always do want to be careful when boosting the high end that you don't overdo it, because that brightness, it tends to sound better, especially if you're kind of newer to mixing, but overdoing it can sound not that great, especially on certain other systems. So if you really pay attention to like a reference track, that will kind of help guide you with that high end. But just a slight boost like this usually isn't going to cause a problem, and it sounds pretty good to me. So, really that's the kind of the process of enhancing. if there's a certain character in your sound that you want to bring out a little bit more, like the sizzle on that snare sound, or alternatively the body of that snare sound, you can definitely feel free to boost those. For the ride cymbal, you can hear that I boosted the body just a little bit. And the reason I did that was more because of the high pass. The high pass started to filter out that body. And so I boosted it just a little bit to kind of help balance out that high pass. And, I boosted the highs kind of for the same reason. You can see that I have these two cuts here, which kind of take away from those higher frequencies. So I wanted to boost that a little bit more. But it's also partly for the same reason that I boosted the highs on the snare. Just to, kind of give it a little bit more of a crispness or a sizzle or whatever. Make it kind of sound nice and bright. So you don't have to EQ in this order. And I don't always EQ in this order. And by that I mean, cutting first and then boosting. Because really the end result is what matters most. And the concept here is just to shape your sound to your preference using EQ and remove any problematic frequencies that are muddying up the sound, kind of distracting from the sound, or just aren't really all that necessary to that sound. And then boosting any frequencies that you'd like to hear that sound have a little bit more of. And there is a reason that I personally like to kind of cut first a lot of the time and then boost afterwards. And I'll explain more about that in one of the tips in the tips video for this section of the tutorial. So hopefully this was kind of helpful. Hopefully it gives you an idea of, how you can enhance and clean up certain sounds. And really, in the end, it takes a lot of practice to really get efficient and get good at this process. There aren't really any shortcuts that I can give you. It's all about using your ears and all that. But there is one more point I'd like to mention, and this is just that while mixing, you don't necessarily want your sounds to sound perfect on their own. It's very important to consider how each sound fits into the mix while you're EQing those sounds. Like in this example, I boosted the highs for both of these sounds, but you can imagine if I were to do that for every single sound, on their own, each of those sounds would probably sound pretty good. But then when I play it in the mix, all of these sounds have a boosted high end. So, maybe there ends up being too much high end in the track, but even more likely it's just that, your sounds are going to kind of get blurry in that high end and there's not going to be a whole lot of clarity. Even though each independent sound has a lot of clarity, when they all play together, it just kind of gets lost. So, it might be a good idea to only boost the highs on your more important elements regarding that high end, like your hi-hats, your snare, and then kind of your main lead sounds that have any frequencies present in that high end. And, I'm talking a lot about the high end, but that goes for, any kind of frequency range, really. The point is just really make the sound pretty good on its own, but even more importantly, make it sound good in the context of the full mix. So while you're EQing a certain sound, it might be smart to be listening to that sound in the context of the other sounds that you've already mixed into your song.